Home Time is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy pickups, the most advanced in Chevy history. Chevy S10 pickups, compact, fun, and hard-working. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle. Chevy Astro, the van that can. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy truck.
Welcome to the Home Time Project Center. I'm Dean Johnson.
And I'm Peggy Knapp. In the video you're about to see, Dean and I will be giving you complete step-by-step instructions for re-roofing your house with asphalt shingles.
This video on roofing is just one in a library of instructional programs designed to assist you in working on a wide range of home improvement projects.
In response to the ever-growing world of do-it-yourselfers, Home Time has developed this unique educational system. The elements that make up this system are this videotape, the project guidebook that accompanies the videotape, and the bibliography that gives you places to look for further information on the subject.
Now, before we begin our roofing project, I want to explain how you can best make use of this videotape. First off, you should watch the tape all the way through to get an idea of the methods, the steps, and the terminology we use. Then review the tape again. Only this time, check off in the project guide the tools and materials appropriate to your roofing project.
Take your project guide with you to your local home center or hardware store. There, the salespeople will be able to help answer questions and direct you to what you need. Now, roofing is a tough project, but if you take your time and work step by step, following our guidelines, you should get the professional-looking results you want and the satisfaction of doing the work yourself. Now, just walking around your neighborhood, you should be able to see a number of roof styles. Here are 4 that are common to this continent: the gable roof, the hip roof, the gambrel, and the mansard. Many houses will have a combination of roof styles. For example, the house that Dean and I will be re-roofing has a gable roof, while the porch has a hip roof. Now, I also want to introduce some terms that describe various parts of a typical roof. This horizontal overhang is called the eave. The diagonal edge is called the rake, and the angle of the roof is called the pitch or the slope.
Where 2 slopes meet is a valley, and the top ridge of the roof is, of course, the ridge. This cross-section helps to illustrate the structural elements that make up the framework of a typical roof. Anchored to the top plate and ceiling joists are the rafters, which rise diagonally on this gable roof, secured to a ridge board and stabilized by a collar beam. Covering the rafters is the roof deck, which is made up of plywood and roofing felt, which acts as a moisture barrier. This sheathing can be plywood, wafer board, or boards of various widths. On roofs with wood shingle, you'll often find open sheathing, where there are air spaces in between the boards to help in the ventilation. A protective metal flashing is applied to all areas where water can collect or penetrate the surface of the roof, like around the chimney, roof vents, and valleys. Then last comes the roof covering itself. In our case, it's asphalt shingles. Okay, let's go inside.
Asphalt shingles are by far the most popular residential roofing material on the market today, both professionally and for the do-it-yourselfer. They're good-looking, durable, easy to install, easy to maintain, and they come in a wide variety of colors to complement any home. Asphalt shingles come with either an organic base made of felt and cellulose fibers or an inorganic base made of fiberglass. For our roofing project, we'll be using premium organic-based shingles with a 30-year limited warranty. Now, the choice of roofing materials is greatly influenced by the pitch of the roof, so you will want to determine the pitch of your roof before you purchase your roofing materials. And the other thing to keep in mind when roofing a house is you're going to be way off the ground, so always be thinking about safety.
Although we'll be addressing safety equipment and procedures throughout the program, I want to mention it up front. Before you climb your ladder to inspect your existing roof or measure its pitch, be safety conscious. There are techniques and equipment designed for your safety, like toe boards and ladder jacks, which we'll get into later on in the program. What we recommend is that you work at a comfortable pace, wear the proper clothing and protection, and follow the manufacturer's guidelines in using their tools, materials, and equipment.
The tools and equipment needed for re-roofing a house are fairly common, but there are a few tools designed specifically for the job, like a squangle for determining the pitch of a roof, or a roofing hatchet, which has several shingling tasks built right into it, a waffle head for nailing, and a gauge for establishing shingle exposure and inset. Now, some of these tools you may have, some you may want to purchase, while other tool and equipment needs can be handled at your local rental supply store. And don't forget the most vital tool on the job, you. Roofing is a labor-intensive job, and your attitude plays an important part in the final outcome.
Exposed to the elements, this 100-year-old farmhouse has been exposed to its share of weather. If these old shingles could speak, they'd tell of stories of temperatures ranging from 30 below zero to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, year to year and season to season. They'd tell of being pelted by umpteen tons of rain. Over 300 feet of snow have melted off the slopes and down the valleys. And you know what? They definitely look it. So, it's time for some new shingles. Let's take a more defined look at this particular roof. This cross-section should help to illustrate the elements that make up the basic framework for your typical roof. Covering the rafters is the roof deck, made up of sheathing and roofing felt underlayment. On roofs with wood shingles like this one, many times you'll find open sheathing where there's spaces in between the boards to help out in ventilation. This black stuff right here is roofing felt that is applied over the top of the sheathing and provides a moisture barrier. A protective metal flashing is installed in all areas where water can collect or penetrate the roof, around chimneys, roof vents, and valleys. Last comes the roof covering. In this case, an 80-year-old layer of wooden shingles and a later layer of asphalt shingles. The steps Peggy and I will be taking to roof this house will include: Step 1, planning and preparation. You should examine your existing roof to determine whether you'll be tearing off or roofing over your existing roof. Establish the pitch of your roof. Measure the size of the roof. Select the roofing materials you'll be using. Gather the tools that will be required for your project. Step 2, tearing off. Here you'll be setting up ladders and planks, making sure your lawn and shrubs are protected, tearing off the old roof to the sheathing. Step 3, sheathing. For our roof, we'll be installing new sheathing, applying a weather shield, and applying a roofing felt underlayment. Step 4, flashing. You will be installing valley flashing, chimney flashing, and a drip edge along the rake and the eave. Step 5, installing the new roof. Today we'll be adding a new asphalt roof and showing techniques for a starter course, working a diagonal pattern with shingles, nailing with a roof hatchet as well as a pneumatic nail gun, shingling valleys, dormers, the hip, the ridge, and around vents. And we'll be installing aluminum gutters and downspouts. Then later on in the program we'll show you some roofing techniques that aren't required on this particular roof.
Estimating the number of shingles that we'll need for our roof is a fairly simple calculation, and there are two ways you can approach it. One is to get up on the roof and measure the dimensions of the roof planes, multiplying the widths times the length to give you the total number of square feet. Then you divide that figure by 100 to give you the numbers of squares of shingles that you'll need. The other method works like this. First, you measure the dimensions of your house on the ground. Then you figure in the slope and check it with your slope conversion chart, which is included in your project guide. Then you multiply the total square feet by the adjacent figure to the right of your roof pitch.
The pitch or slope of the roof is the number of inches that the roof rises for each foot of run. To calculate this, I'll take a 3-foot board and mark off 12 inches along the board. In placing my level, I raise one end of the board up until the bubble's in the middle of the level. Then, taking my ruler, I place that in an upright position against the 12-inch mark and measure it. There, 8 inches. What this tells us is that for every 8 inches of rise, there's a foot of run. Consequently, this roof has a pitch 8 and 12.
Now, there's another way of determining the pitch of your roof, and that's with this. It's called a squangle, and you can find it at most home centers and hardware stores. This is how it works. Align this blade so that it matches any vertical line of the house. Then adjust this blade so it matches up with the angle of the rafter or the roof. Then read the indicator on the scale here. It's an 8. So this roof has an 8 and 12 pitch, which is perfect for just about any kind of roof covering.
On our house, we have 3 different sloped roofs, which we take into consideration when doing our calculations. And don't forget to order additional shingles for the hips and ridges when doing your materials estimate.
Not to mention other materials like flashing, sheathing, and nails. And remember to add 10% to your estimate for waste and possible later repair and replacement.
Besides determining tools, materials, and equipment that we'll be needing for the roof, another important consideration in planning and preparation is weather. Watching the weather forecasts is a must. If you have no roof, you have no protection.
Another important consideration in planning your project is a permit. Now, codes and permits vary from state to state and even county to county, so it's best to check.
So what did you get?
I got 2,200 square feet.
Great, exactly what I got.
Good.
You know, it's not a bad idea to have your roofing supplier or home center people take a look at your measurements to make sure that your calculations are correct.
In preparation for the tear-off, we make sure that the shrubs around the perimeter of the house are protected from the falling debris. And in terms of your wardrobe, strictly informal, loose, comfortable, and with shoes that grip.
Working along the eave can be a bit precarious, especially when the pitch in the roof is above a 512. For our roof, we're going to be using ladder jacks and some planks. It should make the work a little bit more manageable. Another thing to keep in mind when setting up an extension ladder is to always be alert for overhead power lines and telephone wires.
The correct way to set up an extension ladder is to first put the base of the ladder near the wall and then walk down the rungs. And then from the side, lift the base of the ladder away from the wall, a distance equal to about 1/4 the ladder's length. And then make sure that the feet are level. In fact, if you have to, shim for level with scrap pieces of wood. Then to keep the ladder from slipping from side to side, you can tie it off at the top to one of the gutter supports. Or if the gutters are down, put a nail in the roof and tie it off to that.
These ladder jacks can be positioned on either side of the ladder and can be adjusted in 1-inch increments to level the plank to the angle of the ladder. When erecting ladder jacks and planks, it's always real important that the plank you're using is able to support your weight without sagging. Every plank has its own specific weight capacity, and some are meant strictly for one person.
We rented this aluminum plank to span the distance. But whether using wood or aluminum, it's important that the plank extend at least 1.5 feet out from the ladder jack supports.
You know, if you do a lot of fixing up around your house like we do, you might consider adding a very dependable tool to your toolbox like we have.
The keys to our Chevy S10 pickup. The Chevy S10 is a perfect vehicle for the do-it-yourselfer. It carries everything we need for all the projects we get involved with, like this roofing project.
A 2-wheel drive S10 can tow up to 5,000 pounds when properly equipped. That includes trailer, passengers, and cargo. Another thing I really like is its double wall construction. It takes a lumps from any load that might slip or slide, and that leaves the sheet metal on the outside looking great.
And most important, it gets you where you're going. The power from its optional V6 engine lets us haul heavy loads with ease.
Some of the homes we work on are located way off paved roads.
That's why I particularly like this model. It has shift-on-the-fly 4-wheel drive, which means I can shift from 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive high and back again at any speed. It makes it so easy to drive anywhere.
It's like having a wheelbarrow you can drive. Since we got our Chevy S10 pickup, we can't do without it.
It's really true. Nothing works like a Chevy truck. And now for the dirty work. that we've removed the old roofing material, we want to inspect the old sheathing for any damaged areas. Areas where water rot might have weakened the wood or the joints. If it's plywood, check to see if it's delaminated. Look for any nails that might have lifted up, and in general, make sure that the sheathing is tight and anchored down real well.
Now that the destruction's done, we can begin the construction. We're installing new sheathing onto the old to create a solid deck for the new shingle. When installing sheathing panels, you want to position them horizontally along the roof, leaving about a 1/16" gap in between the panels to allow for expansion. Using 8-penny nails, I'm making sure to nail through the old sheathing every 6 inches along the rafter.
It's important to stagger the panels so the vertical joints don't line up along the same rafter, which can create a weak deck. Now, the sheathing we're installing is 3/8" plywood called CDX, which is the least expensive grade, but since it's all going to be covered up anyway, appearance isn't a priority. For hips and ridges and along the rake, we install full sheets, and then we snap chalk lines at the center of the peaks and cut the boards in place. This trick isn't recommended when the excess is more than a half a panel over the top of the ridge, or on a particularly windy day. After the sheathing is down and before we apply the roofing felt, we want to install a metal drip edge along the eaves. The drip edge is an L-shaped strip of aluminum or galvanized steel. The purpose of the drip edge is to prevent water from running up under the shingles. I'm spacing these galvanized roofing nails every 10 inches along the span.
For this Minnesota farmhouse, Peggy and I need to apply a special weather layer for our first course along the eave. In warmer climates, this would be roofing felt, and we'd be applying it over the entire roof. But in colder parts of the country where ice dams can form, an ice shield is recommended. In fact, in many parts of the country, it's considered building code.
There are several kinds of weather shields. The one we're using is made of a rubberized asphalt material and has a sand-covered, slip-resistant surface. It comes in 3-foot widths and has an adhesive backing that sticks tight. With that anchored smooth, we're ready to apply the roofing felt.
Roofing felt typically comes 3 feet wide by 72 feet long. It's secured to the sheathing using either roofing nails or staples. Now, requirements vary depending on the roofing material used, so it's best to check with the manufacturer's recommendations before making your purchase. Most roofing felt is printed with a white line 2 inches from the top edge. This serves as an overlap guide for the following row. We'll be laying the felt in horizontal overlapping rows, starting with a weather shield and working to the ridge.
After lining up the felt along the edge, I tack it down near the corner so that I can still adjust it. Now, the tool I'm using is called a stapling hammer, and it shoots out staples as it hits the roof. And for ease and speed, it's well worth the price.
The sheathing should be dry before you lay the felt down, making sure that you lay it down smooth, avoiding any wrinkling or buckling. You do this by not getting too far ahead of yourself and stapling as you go.
Once you get the hang of it, it goes real quick, aligning the bottom to the 2-inch white guideline, stapling down the end and unrolling it, then stapling it as you go. When overlapping the ends, you want to give yourself a good 4 inches. For hips and valleys, you want to overlap a good 6 inches.
The same goes for the ridge. Lay the felt over the top of the ridge and staple to the other side. When cutting for a roof vent, place the felt up next to it to see where they line up. Then using a utility knife, cut for either side of the vent. Slide the paper into position and staple. To protect the felt from wind, we've secured it for the night using wood lath. And that ought to do it.
The next step in our re-roofing project is flashing. Metal flashing is used to bridge a joint where the roofing material butts up against any other material. We're using galvanized metal. You could be using aluminum, copper, or even stainless steel. Now, the drip edges and the valley flashing we want to install before we lay the shingles. Other forms of flashing, like around chimneys and vents, we'll install as we work the shingles up the roof. Now here's Dean, down in the valley.
In case you haven't guessed, a valley is where 2 sloping roofs meet. The flashing used in a valley is a continuous strip of metal that runs from the top to the bottom. This particular flashing I'm installing is called preformed metal valley flashing, and it comes in sheets 10 feet long and widths from 16 to 24 inches. If your valley is longer than 10 feet, start from the bottom and overlap. I'm nailing about 1 inch in from the edge every 6 inches. This valley flashing has a ridge that runs down the center to prevent excessive water from running up the sides and getting underneath the shingles. When working with flashing, try not to mix your metals. If you're working with galvanized metal, use galvanized nails. If you're working with aluminum, use aluminum nails. Mixing your metals can cause a reaction called electrolysis.
This job is tough enough, and you don't want to make it any harder. Each bundle of asphalt shingles weighs about 70 pounds, and they're unwieldy even if you split them in half. So when you're ordering your shingles, ask your supplier to deliver them to the roof. If delivery of your shingles isn't possible, then we suggest you look into renting a hoist, also called a ladder loader.
How you load your roof is also real important. You want to distribute the weight of the shingles equally across the roof.
The laying on of the new roof can be broken down into 4 fundamental steps. First off comes the starter roll, then the row-by-row overlapping application, then flashing for dormers, vents, and chimneys, and last, the hips and the ridge.
The starter roll or starter course provides a base for the first row of shingles. For the starter course, we're using an 18-inch wide roll of mineral surfaced rolled roofing. We want to align our starter course so that it overhangs a ½ inch on the eave and on the rake.
You may be wondering where on the roof is the best place to begin shingling. Well, there is no absolute answer. Of course, you do want to begin at the bottom and work up toward the ridge. If you're right-handed, it's smart to start at the left corner and apply the shingles from left to right. Some books recommend that you start on the largest and most visible side of the house so you can establish a uniform pattern. Fine, whatever works best for you. The main point we want to make here is that you take your time, get the hang of it, and gradually build a rhythm that works best for you.
If your house is built true, then by aligning your starter roll square to your eave, your first row should automatically be straight. Now, to be sure, you can lay a couple of shingles on either side of the roll, snap a chalk line in between the top edges, and then align shingles to that line. We're using the 4-course diagonal method. Here's how it works. Start with a full shingle on the lower left corner of the roof with tabs flush to the starter roll. On the second course, cut 6 inches off the left side of a full shingle and apply the 30-inch section over the first course shingle, exposing the first course 5 inches. For the third course, cut 12 inches and apply the 24-inch section over the second course, again exposing 5 inches. Cut 18 inches from the left side for the fourth course and apply the right half over the third course shingle. Now apply a full shingle on the right of each course, starting with the first course. Now to maintain this method, repeat the process starting with a full shingle again.
The ideal temperature for applying asphalt shingles is between 40 and 85 degrees. The cooler the temperature, the more brittle the shingles become.
I'd like to take a couple minutes to show you a safety device that'll help support you on steep sloped roofs. These are called roof jacks. They're basically a couple lengths of angle iron that'll hold a 2x6 for you to stand on. Let me show you how they work. When securing the jacks, I want to make sure to place the nails where they will be covered by a course of shingles. So, I center the leg of the jack so that the bottom nail is just above the bottom edge of the shingle it goes under. Then when the roof's complete, I pull the jack off the nails, lift the shingle, and pound down the nails.
Now, when cutting shingles, you can use a straight edge or a square, and in time, you may become so adept at it that you'll just be able to eyeball it. Now, I'm using a utility knife. You can also use a hook knife. Just be sure and have plenty of sharp blades on hand. And when cutting with a straight blade, always score on the back of the shingle because the mineral coating will dull the blade very quickly. Some roofing hatchets have a razor blade built right in, speeding the shingling process all the more.
We're using standard 1¼ galvanized roofing nails. When roofing over existing asphalt shingles, you'll want to use nails 1 3/4 inches long. Every full 3-tab shingle is secured with 4 nails, positioned 5/8 inch above each cutout and 1 inch in from each side. On shingles that have the self-sealing mastic, you want to place the nail between the cutout and the mastic. And if after you've laid a shingle you notice that it's out of alignment, rather than trying to readjust it, it's just best to replace it and save it for later use on a hip or a ridge.
Nailing is a fairly slow and tedious job with a roofing hatchet, so to speed things up, we've rented a pneumatic nail gun, which I think is money well spent. In the past, pneumatic tools have been designed with the contractor in mind, but now manufacturers are making these tools more available for the person who wants to do their own home improvements. The gun is driven by an air compressor, and because of its power, you must be extra careful when handling it. Eye protection should always be worn by the person operating the nailer and anyone else in the work area. Always disconnect it when loading, servicing, or making adjustments. Connect the tool to the air supply only when ready to nail. When not in use, leave it disconnected. Make sure the compressor regulator is set at the correct pressure for the tool, since there are different pressures for different tools. And when the nailer is connected, use common sense and be careful where you point it. Don't place a hand or any other part of your body in the nail discharge area, and keep your finger off the trigger when carrying it. So keeping safety in mind, let's go to work. When nailing, I want to place the gun flush with the slope of the roof at a 90-degree angle. We're snapping a chalk line down the side of this valley to act as a cutting guide for our shingles. Now, as you can see, the chalk line angles out as it goes down the flashing. We started the chalk line 1.5 inches from the center of the flashing at the top of the valley and gradually widened out 1 inch for every 8 feet in length. Having it wider at the bottom gives the valley a larger area to hold water and keeps it from backing up under the shingles. Now we'll just cut down this chalk line with a hook knife, cutting 1 shingle at a time. In tearing off the old roof, we also took out the old roof vents. And replacing them was easy. We just bought new ones at our building center. And what I'm installing now is a plumbing stack vent that I purchased to match the diameter of the vent pipe. Now, after running a course of shingles up around the vent pipe, cutting them to fit, I slip the plumbing stack vent over the vent pipe and then nail it down. Then, lay the next course of shingles over the stack vent, cutting them to fit.
By far the most difficult area on the roof to flash is the chimney. It's also the most leak-prone area on the roof. And because it involves some fairly exact cutting and fitting, as well as some masonry work, we've decided to subcontract the job out. Here we install the shingles up to the base of the chimney. Then the base flashing is set over the shingles, which are coated with roofing cement. Roofing cement comes in tubes to be applied with a caulking gun, or in 1 gallon and 5 gallon pails. It's good to keep some on hand for sealing and roof repairs. Then the step flashing is installed, around the corner and up the slope, fabricated to fit in the mortar between the bricks. Okay, with that in place, we continue our shingling, tucking each shingle underneath the overlapping flashing.
The hip and the ridge require different shingling techniques. Now, the final step on the porch here will be to shingle the hip. Now, you start by cutting single tabs. You get 3 single tabs from every 3-tab shingle by cutting a wedge out above the tab. Then taper the ends in from the outer tab about 1 inch. Now, using a chalk line as a guide, I began at the corner and cut the edges off flush with the other shingles. Then I'll work up the ridge, allowing for the 5-inch exposure.
The last shingles to be installed are along the ridge, and to be efficient, be sure and cut plenty of single tabs. The ridge shingles are applied the same way as the hip shingles, but make sure to lap the shingles away from prevailing winds.
Well, now the largest part of our project is complete, and this old farmhouse is protected with a new weather-tight skin.
Another aspect of roofing is the rain gutters and downspouts. The most widely used are made out of galvanized metal, vinyl, or aluminum. For our house, we'll be using aluminum.
The gutters come in 10 and 20-foot lengths and in a 4, 5, and 6-inch width. There are several brackets on the market for attaching the gutter to the fascia. The kind I have here is a strap type, and it's nailed under the first row of shingles and then clipped under the outer edge of the gutter. Now, the elements that make up the system for both metal and vinyl include the gutter lengths, inside and outside elbows, connectors, right and left end caps, the drop outlet which connects to the downspout system, downspout straps, and a splash block.
But before you measure and fit it all together, you want to establish where you want your downspouts and mark off the slope on the eave. We gave ourselves 1-inch slope for every 20 feet of eave. Now that we've attached all the elements, we want to go back over all the joints with caulking. Then, to prevent leaves and debris from clogging the system, we've set strainers on top of all the gutters. Along with installing new gutters and downspouts, we've done some cosmetic work to complement the new roof. Wait until you see the difference it makes.
There's a feeling of satisfaction that comes after finishing a home project, especially a challenging project that requires careful planning and execution.
Roofing a house is a labor-intensive job, but we've made it a bit easier by following a few basic steps and using the right tools and equipment. And not only have we saved ourselves a good portion of the expense by doing the work ourselves, the final result is a beautiful, weather-tight roof that ought to last a good 30 years.
Well, now that we've finished up the work here, let's go back to the studio and we'll show you what's involved in roofing over an existing roof. As we said earlier, we don't recommend roofing over more than one roof because of the additional weight and the uneven appearance of the surface. For a single-layered roof, though, it's a real time saver. A great deal of the information we've already covered applies as well to a roof over. Now, to ensure a smooth-looking roof, you'll want to repair any and all irregularities, replace any damaged or missing shingles, anchor all warped or turned up shingles with roofing cement. The simplest way to do a roof over is to follow the same shingling pattern on the existing roof. This method is called the butt-up technique. I'll show you. After we determine the existing shingle exposure, we cut a starter strip the same width. You may need to cut a couple of inches off the top of the first course, depending on the existing exposure. You can see the first course is narrower than the successive courses, but it won't be visible from the ground. Depending on your roof, you'll want to establish the thickness of the existing shingles and sheathing to determine the right length of nails you need. We're using 1 3/4 inch nails. The important thing is to make sure that the nail isn't so long that it pierces the sheathing. Shingling around a dormer requires a special approach, and because we didn't have one on our roof, we built one here in the studio to demonstrate that process. Now, when shingling around a dormer, it's important to plan so that your tabs keep their vertical alignment. Now, to do that, I shingle up to the dormer, shingle the dormer roof, and then shingle up one side past the peak of the dormer. Then snap a horizontal chalk line across the top of the roof and lay a course of shingles across to the other side of the dormer, just past the edge. But just tack those down. Those are just to give yourself a measurement. Now, I've established a pattern on this side of the dormer, and that is that the second row of shingles is 6 inches to the left of the first row. That makes my first row of shingles a long row and the second row of shingles a short row. That's the pattern I want to keep on the other side of the dormer. So by counting up long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, I know that the top row of shingles is a short row. So coming over here, I snap a vertical chalk line from the end of this tacked-on shingle to the end of this shingle in the second row. That gives me a vertical alignment for my short row of shingles. Then I measure over 6 inches to the right and snap another vertical chalk line. And that gives me a vertical alignment for the long row of shingles.
In flashing a wall or dormer, you can do two things. Use continuous flashing or step flashing. Continuous flashing means taking a length of 10-inch wide aluminum or galvanized steel and bending it down the center to conform to the slope of the roof. Now, step flashing accomplishes the same thing, except you apply those like shingles. Working from the bottom, I place it flush with the top edge of the asphalt shingle. Then after placing the shingle over the flashing, I nail it down, making sure it secures both the shingle and the flashing. You can either choose to cut and bend them yourself or have them made at a metal shop. Depending on your siding, you may need to pry out the bottom course of the dormer siding in order to slip the metal flashing underneath it. If you have to slip the metal flashing underneath, it may require notching along the top so it'll fit around nails.
Home Time is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy pickups, the most advanced in Chevy history. Chevy S10 pickups, compact, fun, and hard-working. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle. Chevy Astro, the van that can. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy truck.
We hope this video makes your roofing project more manageable. As with most things, there are variables with every project. Problems particular to your house we weren't able to handle in the video presentation. If you'd like additional information on the subject of roofing, be sure and check our bibliography at the end of our companion project guide. And if you're planning any additional home projects, be sure and check out some of our other titles.
And if you've never seen our Home Time television show, well, check us out sometime as we explore and explain ways to beautify and maintain your home. I'm Peggy Knapp.
I'm Dean Johnson. So long.